The explosion shattered the pre-dawn silence like a thunderclap, sending Staff Sergeant Maria Santos flying backward into the concrete barrier. Her right hand, which had been gripping her M4 carbine moments before, now hung at an unnatural angle. 3 fingers bent in directions that made her stomach lurch. Blood seeped through the tactical gloves, dripping onto the dusty Afghan soil in dark, steady drops. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Santos, report your status. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson's voice crackled through her radio, but Maria could barely hear him over the ringing in her ears. The IED had been buried deeper than intelligence suggested, and her explosive Ordnance Disposal team had walked right into the kill zone. She pressed her back against the concrete T-wall, trying to assess the damage while insurgent rounds pinned off the barrier above her head. Through the smoke and dust, she could see Corporal Jenkins 20 meters away, clutching his leg and calling for a medic. Sergeant Williams was face down in the dirt, motionless. The rest of her team was scattered, pinned down by coordinated small arms fire from 3 different positions. Maria flexed what remained of her right hand and immediately regretted it. White-hot pain shot up her arm, confirming what she already knew: her dominant hand was destroyed. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 Bronze Stars, and a reputation as the best EOD specialist in the 82nd Airborne, and it might all end here because she couldn't grip her weapon properly anymore. But as she watched another burst of machine gunfire tear chunks from the wall above her head, Maria Santos felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: the burning need to prove that being underestimated was the biggest mistake her enemies could make. CTA number 1. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to take a moment to thank you for watching. Creating and narrating these detailed, novel-length stories takes tremendous time and research to bring you the most engaging content possible. We're embarking on a journey of nearly 50,000 words together. That's a full novella. If you're already hooked by what you've heard, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing the story with someone who would enjoy it, and subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest stories. This is going to be an epic adventure, so get comfortable. And let's continue with this remarkable tale. 6 months earlier, forward operating base Shank had buzzed with the controlled chaos of a combat outpost preparing for the spring fighting season. Maria Santos stood in the equipment bay, methodically checking her bomb disposal robot sensors, while her team prepared for another day of hunting improvised explosive devices. Along Highway 1, Santos, you're up for a battlefield promotion, First Sergeant Rodriguez announced, approaching with a folder thick with paperwork. Colonel wants to see you at 1400 hours. Word is they're considering you for Master Sergeant, youngest EOD specialist ever to make the grade. Maria looked up from the robot's manipulator arm, her dark eyes reflecting the harsh fluorescent lighting. At 28, she had already earned a reputation that preceded her throughout the military explosive ordnance disposal community. Born in East L.A. to parents who cleaned office buildings at night to make ends meet, she had joined the Army at 18 with nothing but determination and a mechanical aptitude that amazed her instructors. Did they say what the catch is? She asked, wiping grease from her hands with a shop rag. Nothing good ever comes without strings attached in this man's army. Rodriguez grinned, his weathered face creaking into familiar lines. The catch is they want you to train a new team. Fresh meat from Fort Lee, straight out of EOD school. Command thinks your unique approach to problem solving might rub off on them. Maria's unique approach had earned her both commendations and reprimands over the years. She had a tendency to improvise when standard procedures failed, leading to spectacular successes and equally spectacular arguments with superior officers who preferred their soldiers to follow protocols to the letter. Her personnel file contained equal amounts of praise and concern about her creative interpretations of explosive ordnance disposal techniques. "When do I meet my new kids?" she asked, already dreading the responsibility of keeping inexperienced soldiers alive in one of the most dangerous jobs in the military. "Tomorrow, and Santos. One of them is your replacement as team leader if you take the promotion. Command wants to see how you handle transitioning authority while maintaining operational effectiveness." The implications hit her immediately. This wasn't just about training new soldiers, it was about proving she could lead beyond the technical aspects of bomb disposal. They were testing whether Maria Santos, the girl from East L.A. who had learned to fix cars in her uncle's garage, could become the kind of leader the Army needed for its future. That evening, Maria sat in her bunk reading the personnel files of her incoming team members. Specialist Jennifer Chen, 22, mechanical engineering degree from MIT. Before enlisting, parents wanted her to be a doctor. Private First Class Marcus Thompson, 19, grew up in rural Montana, joined after his older brother was killed by an IED in Iraq. Corporal David Kim, 24, former police officer from Seattle. Career change after a shooting incident left him questioning civilian law enforcement. Each file told a story of someone seeking purpose, redemption, or simply a chance to serve something larger than themselves. Maria recognized the hunger in their enlistment photos, the same desperate need to prove their worth that had driven her own military career. She closed the files and walked outside to the small observation deck. Behind her quarters, the Hindu Kush Mountains rose like ancient sentinels against the star-filled sky, their peaks catching the last light of sunset. Somewhere beyond those mountains, Taliban fighters were preparing for spring operations, manufacturing the improvised explosive devices that Maria and her team would spend the coming months hunting. Couldn't sleep either? Maria turned to find Captain Sarah Mitchell approaching with 2 cups of coffee. Sarah commanded the military police company that provided security for EOD operations, and over the past year, she and Maria had developed a friendship built on mutual respect and shared frustration with military bureaucracy. "Just thinking about tomorrow," Maria said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Rodriguez says they want me to take on a training role. Part of me wonders if they're trying to move me away from the action because I make them nervous." Sarah laughed, settling onto the bench beside her. "You make everyone nervous, Santos. That's what makes you so effective. You see solutions where other people see problems." She paused, studying Maria's profile in the gathering darkness. "But maybe it's time to think about sharing that gift instead of just using it." The conversation drifted to safer topics: families. Back home, plans for post-deployment leave, speculation about whether the forward operating base would still exist in 5 years. But Maria's mind kept returning to the personnel files and the weight of responsibility they represented. The next morning brought her first meeting with Specialist Chen, who arrived at the equipment bay 30 minutes early and had already completed the daily maintenance checklist for 3 of the bomb disposal robots. "Ma'am, I wanted to review the technical specifications for the Mk7 suit before our briefing," Chen said, her voice carrying the precise diction of someone accustomed to academic environments. "I noticed some discrepancies between the manual and the actual protective capabilities listed in the field modification reports." Maria studied the young woman carefully. Chen stood barely 5 feet tall, but her posture radiated confidence and intellectual curiosity. Her questions about the bomb suit's design were sophisticated, demonstrating a grasp of engineering principles that exceeded what Maria had expected from someone fresh out of military training. "The manual is wrong about a lot of things," Maria said finally. "Real-world applications have a way of proving that engineers sitting in air-conditioned offices don't always understand how their equipment performs when people are shooting at you." Over the following hours, Maria introduced Chen to the other team members and began assessing their individual strengths and weaknesses. Thompson proved to have an intuitive understanding of explosive devices that reminded Maria of herself at his age. He could look at a pile of scrap metal and wire and immediately understand how it might be weaponized. Kim brought tactical awareness from his police background, constantly scanning for threats and security vulnerabilities that pure military training might miss. But it was during their first live training exercise that Maria discovered something unexpected about her new team. They worked together with a natural synchronization that usually took months to develop, anticipating each other's needs and covering weaknesses without explicit direction. "Chen, what's your assessment of the secondary device?" Maria asked as they approached a training IED buried in the base's practice range. "Given the positioning and the decoy components, I'd estimate 60% probability of a secondary device positioned to target first responders," Chen replied, her voice steady despite the pressure of being evaluated. "Thompson, can you confirm the signature?" Thompson studied the metal detector readings and nodded. "Definitely something buried about 15 meters northeast of the primary device. Pattern matches what we've seen in intelligence reports from Helmand Province." Maria felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. These soldiers were learning faster than she had anticipated, which was both encouraging and dangerous. Confidence without experience led to fatal mistakes, and she had seen too many promising careers end in body bags. The training exercise concluded successfully, but Maria noticed Kim seemed distracted during the debriefing. His answers were perfunctory, and his attention kept drifting to the radio communications from other units operating outside the base perimeter. "Something on your mind, Corporal?" she asked after dismissing the others. Kim hesitated, clearly wrestling with whether to voice his concerns. "Ma'am, I've been monitoring the radio traffic from the patrol units. There's been a significant increase in IED activity along Route Copper in the past week. 3 incidents involving buried devices that our intelligence report said weren't supposed to exist in that area." Maria had noticed the same pattern, but she was impressed that Kim had connected the dots without prompting. "What's your conclusion?" "Either our intelligence is wrong, or someone is feeding information to the insurgents about our patrol routes and timing," Kim said quietly. "In my police experience, when criminal patterns change suddenly, it usually means someone on the inside is providing information." The implications of Kim's observation settled over Maria like a cold weight. If there was a security breach at the forward operating base, her team would be walking into traps designed specifically to exploit their standard operating procedures. Everything they thought they knew about enemy capabilities and intentions might be compromised. That night, Maria requested a private meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Davidson, the base commander. Davidson was a career infantry officer who had earned his reputation leading paratroopers through some of the fiercest fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. He listened to Maria's concerns without interruption, his weathered face growing increasingly grim as she detailed the pattern of IED incidents Kim had identified. "How confident are you in this assessment?" Davidson asked when she finished. "Confident enough to recommend changing our operational patterns immediately," Maria replied. "If I'm wrong, we lose some tactical flexibility. If I'm right, and we do nothing, we're going to start losing people." Davidson nodded slowly, his mind already working through the implications. "I'll initiate a security review and restrict access to patrol information on a need-to-know basis. In the meantime, I want your team to start varying your approaches and techniques. Assume everything we do is being observed and reported." As Maria left the commander's office, she felt the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Her team's safety now depended not just on their technical skills, but on her ability to anticipate threats that extended far beyond the explosive devices they were trained to defeat. The next morning brought news that validated her concerns in the worst possible way. A patrol from Bravo Company had hit a complex IED attack along Route Copper, exactly where Kim's analysis had predicted increased activity. 2 soldiers were dead and 5 wounded, including Sergeant Martinez, whom Maria had known since her first deployment. Standing in the base medical facility, watching medics work frantically to stabilize Martinez's mangled legs, Maria felt the familiar cold rage that had sustained her through 3 combat tours. Someone was playing games with American lives, and she intended to find out who. Chen approached her quietly, having heard about the attack through the base's informal communication network. "Ma'am, Thompson and Kim are reviewing the incident. Reports from the past month. They think they've identified a pattern in the timing of attacks that might help us predict future incidents." Maria looked at her newest team member with a mixture of pride and concern. Chen was learning to think tactically, but she was also developing the kind of personal investment in the mission that could cloud judgment and lead to unnecessary risks. "What kind of pattern?" Maria asked. "Attacks seem to cluster around certain phases of the moon and specific times of day that correspond to shift changes at checkpoints along the main supply routes," Chen explained. "If Thompson's right, we should be able to predict when and where the next incident is most likely to occur." The sophistication of such planning suggested enemy capabilities far beyond what intelligence reports had indicated. Maria realized her team was facing an adversary who combined traditional insurgent tactics with modern intelligence gathering and analytical techniques. Over the following weeks, Maria's team began operating under the assumption that their every move was being monitored and analyzed. They varied their routes, changed their timing, and developed hand signals to communicate information that couldn't be trusted to radio networks. The paranoia was exhausting, but it kept them alive as other units continued to suffer casualties from increasingly sophisticated IED attacks. Thompson proved particularly adept at thinking like an insurgent bomb maker, accurately predicting where devices were most likely to be hidden based on terrain analysis and traffic patterns. His rural Montana background had taught him to read landscape and weather in ways that urban soldiers often missed. "The thing about people who plant bombs," he explained during one briefing, "is they're lazy, just like everybody else. They want maximum effect with minimum effort, which means they're going to choose locations that are easy to access, hard to detect, and guaranteed to have targets." Kim's police experience became invaluable for understanding the human intelligence networks that supported IED operations. He identified patterns in local civilian behavior that often preceded attacks, helping the team avoid areas where insurgent surveillance was most likely. But it was Chen who made the connection that changed everything. While reviewing technical specifications for captured enemy devices, she noticed components that shouldn't have been available to insurgent forces: sophisticated electronic triggers and explosive compounds that required supply chains extending far beyond Afghanistan's borders. "Ma'am, these devices aren't being manufactured locally," she reported during a late-night briefing in Maria's quarters. The level of technical sophistication and the materials involved suggest production facilities with access to international markets and advanced manufacturing capabilities. Maria studied the technical analysis Chen had prepared, feeling pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "You're saying we're not just fighting local insurgents. I'm saying we're fighting someone with resources and technical capabilities equivalent to a nation-state," Chen replied. "And they're testing new technologies on our people before deploying them elsewhere." The realization that her team was facing enemies far more sophisticated and well-funded than official intelligence reports suggested sent a chill down Maria's spine. They weren't just hunting improvised explosive devices, they were engaged in a technological arms race where the stakes were measured in American lives. As the spring fighting season intensified, Maria's team found themselves deployed almost daily, responding to IED incidents that grew increasingly complex and deadly. Each successful disposal added to their reputation, but also painted larger targets on their backs. Enemy forces began specifically targeting EOD teams, recognizing their crucial role in disrupting insurgent operations. The morning that would change everything started like dozens of others. Intelligence reports indicated possible IED activity along a supply route that connected forward operating base Shank to smaller outposts in the surrounding valleys. Maria's team was tasked with clearing a 3-kilometer stretch of road that had been deemed too dangerous for regular patrols. As they prepared their equipment, Maria noticed Thompson seemed unusually quiet. His usual pre-mission banter was replaced by focused concentration that reminded her of herself before particularly dangerous operations. "What's got you spooked?" she asked while they loaded the bomb disposal robot into their mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle. "I've been studying satellite imagery of the target area," Thompson replied. "The terrain and road configuration are perfect for a complex attack. Multiple escape routes for the triggermen, clear fields of fire for supporting weapons, and natural choke points that force vehicles to slow down." Maria appreciated his analysis, but she also recognized the signs of a soldier who was thinking too much about what could go wrong. "Thompson, fear keeps you alive, but paralysis gets you killed. We've cleared hundreds of devices using the same techniques we'll use today." What she didn't tell him was that her own instincts were screaming warnings about the mission. The intelligence seemed too convenient, the target too obvious, and the timing too perfect. But they had their orders, and American convoys needed. That route cleared before the next supply run. As their convoy departed forward operating base, Shank in the pre-dawn darkness, Maria found herself thinking about her conversation with Sarah Mitchell the night before. Sarah's military police unit would be providing security for the operation, and she had expressed similar concerns about the mission parameters. "Something feels off about this one," Sarah had said. "The intelligence is too specific, and the urgency seems artificial. It's like someone wants us in that particular location at that particular time." Maria had agreed, but pointed out that second-guessing every mission would paralyze their operations entirely. They had to trust their training, their equipment, and each other, while remaining alert for signs that their assumptions were wrong. Now, as their MRAP negotiated the winding mountain road toward the target area, Maria reviewed her team's assignments. One final time, Chen would operate the bomb disposal robot, while Thompson provided technical analysis and Kim maintained security awareness. Maria would coordinate with Sarah's security element and make the final decisions about how to approach any devices they discovered. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Hindu Kush when they reached the designated search area. The road stretched ahead through a narrow valley, with steep mountainsides, providing perfect concealment for enemy observers and weapons positions. "Santos, this is Mitchell," Sarah's voice crackled through the radio. "We've got eyes on possible insurgent movement about 800 meters north of your position. Could be spotters, but they're staying out of small arms range." Maria acknowledged the report while studying the terrain through her binoculars. The rocky slopes and sparse vegetation provided countless hiding places for both observers and hidden explosive devices. Standard procedure called for a methodical sweep of the roadway, using the robot to identify and investigate suspicious objects. But as they began their search, Maria noticed something that made her blood run cold. The road's surface showed signs of recent digging in multiple locations, but the patterns didn't match normal ID placement techniques. Instead of single devices positioned to maximize damage to individual vehicles, the disturbances suggested a coordinated array of explosives designed to trap and destroy an entire convoy. "Chen, halt the robot," she ordered, her mind racing through the tactical implications. "Thompson, I need your assessment of those ground disturbances." "Kim, what's your read on the security situation?" Thompson studied the terrain through his scope before responding. "Ma'am, if I was setting up a complex ambush, this is exactly how I'd do it. Multiple devices tend to detonate in sequence, creating a kill zone that would trap vehicles and personnel in a crossfire. Kim's report was equally concerning. Radio intercepts suggest coordinated movement by multiple enemy elements. They're using communications discipline that indicates sophisticated planning and execution. Maria felt the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded combat, but this time it was accompanied by the realization that her team might be walking into a trap that had been specifically designed to eliminate EOD specialists. The enemy had studied their procedures and was now using that knowledge against them. "Mitchell, we need to pull back and reconsider our approach," she radioed to Sarah. "This feels like a setup designed to draw us into a kill zone." Sarah's response was immediate and professional. "Roger, Santos. We'll establish overwatch positions and call for additional support. Take your time and trust your instincts." As Maria's team repositioned to a more defensible location, she began developing an alternative plan that would allow them to clear the road without walking into an obvious trap. The enemy might have studied their standard procedures, but they couldn't have anticipated every possible variation. That was when she noticed the radio chatter that would later save all their lives. "Santos, we've got a problem." Kim's voice carried the tension of someone trying to remain calm while delivering bad news. He had been monitoring enemy radio frequencies using equipment that technically wasn't supposed to exist, courtesy of connections he'd maintained from his police days. "The chatter I'm picking up suggests they know our exact position and our standard operating procedures. Someone's been feeding them detailed information about EOD team tactics." Maria felt the pieces of the puzzle she'd been assembling over the past month suddenly snap into focus with terrifying clarity. The sophisticated IED components Chen had identified, the tactical awareness Thompson had noticed in enemy attack patterns, and now Kim's intelligence intercepts all pointed to the same conclusion. They were facing an enemy that had penetrated American operations at the highest levels. "How detailed?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. "They know our equipment capabilities, our team composition, and even our individual specialties," Kim replied, his face pale in the early morning light. "Ma'am, they're talking about the female sergeant who improvises and the young specialist. With the engineering background, they know us personally." The implications hit Maria like a physical blow. Every mission they'd completed, every technique they'd developed, every tactical innovation that had kept them alive was now being used to plan their destruction. The enemy hadn't just been watching, they'd been learning, adapting, and preparing. Chen's voice broke through her racing thoughts. "Sergeant Santos, the robot sensors are detecting electronic signatures consistent with remote detonation systems, but the patterns don't match anything in our database. These devices are using technology we haven't encountered before." Maria studied the robot's feed, watching as its sensors painted a picture of the road ahead that defied conventional understanding of IED construction. Instead of individual devices buried at tactical intervals, the entire 3-kilometer stretch appeared to be wired as a single, massive explosive array. "Thompson, give me your worst-case scenario," she ordered. Thompson lowered his binoculars, his young face grim with understanding. "If they're using the road surface as a single device, they could bring down the entire valley wall. We're not just looking at casualties, we're looking at complete burial of anyone caught in the kill zone." The tactical picture was becoming clearer, and it was worse than Maria's most paranoid assumptions. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a demonstration of capabilities designed to prove that even the best American EOD teams could be outmaneuvered and destroyed by sufficiently motivated and well-informed adversaries. "Sarah," Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio with an urgency that confirmed Maria's fears. "Santos, we've got multiple enemy elements moving into position around your location. This isn't opportunistic harassment. It's a coordinated operation designed to trap your team in that valley." Maria closed her eyes and forced herself to think beyond the immediate tactical situation. Someone had orchestrated this entire scenario. From the original intelligence report that brought them here to the sophisticated explosive array that awaited them. The question was whether they could recognize the trap in time to escape it, or if their enemies had anticipated even their ability to adapt. "Team, we're pulling back to Rally Point Alpha," she announced. "This entire mission is compromised, and we need to reassess our situation from a position of strength." But as their vehicles began withdrawing from the valley, Maria noticed something that made her stomach drop. The road behind them showed fresh signs of digging that hadn't been there when they'd arrived. While her team had been focused on the obvious threat ahead, enemy forces had been positioning devices to cut off their retreat. "Mitchell, we've got a problem," she radioed. "Our egress route has been compromised. We're effectively trapped between two explosive arrays with enemy forces controlling the high ground." Sarah's response was immediate and professional, but Maria could hear the underlying tension. "Roger, Santos. We're calling for immediate air support and additional ground forces. Hold your position and prepare for extended operations." As Maria's team established a defensive perimeter in the narrow valley, she realized they were facing the kind of tactical scenario that military academies used as examples of how not to conduct explosive ordnance disposal operations. Every principle of EOD work emphasized avoiding exactly this kind of situation, trapped in an enclosed area with limited options and known enemy capabilities. But Maria Santos hadn't survived 3 combat tours by following textbook solutions to textbook problems. She had built her reputation by finding unconventional approaches to impossible situations, and this morning would either validate that reputation or end it permanently. "Chen, I need you to reprogram the robot for a reconnaissance mission instead of explosive detection," she ordered. "We need to understand the full scope of what we're facing before we can develop a response." Chen's engineering background proved invaluable as she modified the robot's software to focus on mapping the explosive arrays, rather than simply identifying individual devices. What they discovered challenged every assumption about insurgent capabilities and resources. The enemy had effectively turned the entire valley into a single weapon, using commercially available explosives connected by a sophisticated network of wireless detonators that could be triggered from multiple locations. The level of coordination and technical expertise required for such an operation suggested enemy capabilities far beyond what intelligence reports had indicated. "Ma'am, this isn't just about killing our team," Chen observed as she analyzed the robot's data. "This is a demonstration of technological and tactical capabilities designed to send a message to American forces throughout the region." Thompson nodded grimly. "They're proving they can outthink and outmaneuver our best people using our own procedures against us. Every other EOD team is going to have to assume their standard operating procedures are compromised." Kin's radio intercepts confirmed their analysis. Enemy communications indicated this operation was being observed and evaluated by representatives from multiple insurgent groups, effectively turning Maria's team into unwilling participants in a tactical demonstration. "So we're not just fighting for our lives," Maria said quietly. "We're fighting to prevent every other EOD team from facing this same situation." The weight of that responsibility settled over the team like a physical burden. They weren't just soldiers trying to survive a tactical emergency. They had become symbols of American military capability in the face of evolving enemy threats. As enemy forces continued positioning themselves around the valley, Maria began developing a plan that would either save her team or ensure their deaths served a strategic purpose. The enemy had studied American tactics and procedures, but they might not have anticipated the kind of desperate innovation that emerged when conventional approaches failed. "Here's what we're going to do," she announced, gathering her team around. "A map of the valley. We're going to give them exactly what they expect, right up until the moment we do something they've never seen before." The plan she outlined was dangerous, unconventional, and relied on techniques that weren't covered in any military manual. But it was also the kind of tactical thinking that had earned Maria her reputation as a soldier who found solutions where others saw only problems. Chen would use the robot to simulate standard EOD approach procedures, drawing enemy attention and triggering responses that would reveal the exact locations and capabilities of their surveillance and control systems. Thompson would provide overwatch and analysis, identifying weaknesses in the enemy's defensive positions. Kim would coordinate with Sarah's security element to ensure their actions appeared to follow standard protocols while actually implementing Maria's unconventional approach. The key is making them believe we're following predictable patterns, while we're actually gathering intelligence for a response they won't anticipate, Maria explained. They've studied our procedures, but they haven't studied us. As they implemented the first phase of her plan, Maria reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in East L.A., she had learned early that survival often required appearing to conform while actually finding creative ways around seemingly impossible obstacles. The military had refined those instincts into tactical skills, but the underlying principle remained the same. When the system worked against you, you found ways to make the system work for you. The robot's approach toward the first explosive array triggered exactly the response Maria had predicted. Enemy forces revealed their positions as they prepared to detonate the devices, providing Kim with the intelligence he needed to map their command and control structure. They're using a hierarchical detonation system, he reported. Primary controller. About 600 meters northeast, with backup positions at 400 and 800 meter intervals. Take out the primary controller, and we can disrupt the entire array. But reaching the primary controller would require crossing terrain that was certainly under enemy observation and probably defended by additional weapons positions. Standard military tactics would call for air support or artillery to suppress enemy positions before attempting such a movement. Maria studied the terrain through her binoculars, looking for alternatives that might not be obvious to an enemy that had studied American tactical procedures. The valley's configuration included several natural features that could provide concealment, but only if her team was willing to accept risks that violated standard operating procedures. Thompson, what's your assessment of the drainage system that runs along the valley floor? She asked. Thompson studied the area she indicated before responding. It's probably deep enough for concealed movement, but it would put us below ground level with limited visibility and no easy egress if things go wrong. Perfect, Maria replied, surprising her team with her enthusiasm for what seemed like a tactical nightmare. They've planned for us to behave rationally. Time to disappoint them. As they prepared to implement the next phase of her plan, Maria noticed that her team's initial nervousness was being replaced by the kind of focused determination that emerged when soldiers realized their survival depended on perfect execution of an imperfect plan. Chen had finished reprogramming the robot for a mission that would either disable the enemy's command structure or provide enough distraction for the team to escape the valley. Thompson had identified 3 possible routes that would allow them to approach the enemy positions without following predictable patterns. Kim had established communication protocols that would coordinate their actions with Sarah's overwatch element, but as they prepared to move, Maria received a radio call that changed everything about their tactical situation. Santos, this is Colonel Davidson. The base commander's voice carried unusual urgency. We've identified the source of the intelligence leaks. You need to assume all previous operational security protocols are compromised, including your current communications. The implications hit Maria immediately. If their radio communications were compromised, the enemy might be listening to their tactical planning in real time. Everything they had discussed, every plan they had developed, every weakness they had identified might already be known to their adversaries, but instead of panic, Maria felt the cold clarity that had sustained her through countless dangerous situations. The enemy's greatest strength, their detailed knowledge of American procedures, had just become their greatest weakness. "Team, new plan," she announced, switching to hand signals they had developed for situations where radio communication couldn't be trusted. "We're going to assume they're listening to everything and use that against them." What she proposed next would either demonstrate the kind of tactical innovation that kept American forces ahead of their enemies, or provide a cautionary tale about the dangers of improvisation in combat. But as Maria looked at her team's faces, she saw the same determination that had carried her through 3 combat tours and dozens of impossible situations. They weren't just fighting for their lives anymore. They were fighting for the future of explosive ordnance disposal operations. Throughout Afghanistan, every technique they developed, every tactical innovation they demonstrated, would either strengthen or weaken the capabilities of every EOD team that followed. The enemy had studied American procedures and planned accordingly. Now it was time to show them what happened when American soldiers stopped following procedures and started writing new ones. We're deep into this incredible story now, and I hope you're as captivated as I am by these unfolding events. The amount of effort that goes into researching, writing, and narrating these novel-length stories is immense. We're talking about creating content equivalent to a published book. But it's worth it to bring you stories that truly engage and transport you to another world. If you're enjoying this journey so far, please take a second to like this video and share it with friends who appreciate great storytelling. Your support means everything and helps us continue creating these detailed, epic narratives. We still have so much more to discover together. So let's see how this situation unfolds. Maria's S plan required her team to split up, violating every principle of small unit tactics she had learned during 3 combat tours. But conventional tactics had brought them into this trap, and conventional thinking wouldn't get them out alive. "Chen, you're going to take the robot and execute a standard approach to the primary array," Maria signaled using the hand signals they had developed. "Make it look textbook perfect. I want them convinced we're following predictable patterns." Chen nodded, understanding that her role was to serve as both bait and distraction, while the rest of the team maneuvered into positions the enemy wouldn't anticipate. Her engineering background had taught her to think systematically about problems. But combat was teaching her that sometimes the most important thing was making your enemy think systematically while you acted chaotically. Thompson would provide overwatch from a position that violated standard sniper doctrine but offered angles of observation that enemy forces probably hadn't considered. His Montana background had taught him to use terrain in ways that military manuals didn't cover, finding concealment in places where conventional wisdom said none existed. Kim would coordinate with Sarah's security element using communication protocols that appeared normal while actually conveying coded information about enemy positions and capabilities. His police experience had taught him that the most effective surveillance often looked completely routine to anyone who didn't understand what they were actually observing. But Maria reserved the most dangerous task for herself. While her team executed their assigned roles, she would move through the drainage system Thompson had identified, using terrain features to approach the enemy command position from a direction they couldn't possibly have prepared for. The plan required precise timing and flawless execution. But it also required something more fundamental, the willingness to trust each other completely while operating under conditions where a single mistake would kill everyone. As they began implementing the first phase, Maria felt the familiar combination of fear and excitement that preceded her most challenging missions. Every successful E8 operation required balancing calculated risks against potential rewards. But this situation pushed that calculation into territory she had never explored. Chen's robot approached the first explosive array with textbook precision, following procedures that had been refined through hundreds of successful missions. But Maria knew the enemy was watching every movement, analyzing every decision, looking for patterns they could exploit. Through her binoculars, she could see enemy observers tracking the robot's progress from concealed positions along the ridgeline. Their discipline was impressive. No unnecessary movement, no premature reactions, no signs of the kind of tactical impatience that usually characterized insurgent operations. "These aren't typical insurgents," Thompson's voice whispered through their secure communication system. "Watch how they're coordinating their observation posts. That's military-level tactical discipline." Maria had reached the same conclusion, but hearing it confirmed by Thompson's tactical analysis added another layer of complexity to their situation. They weren't just facing an enemy that had studied American procedures. They were facing an enemy with formal military training and experience. As she entered the drainage system that would provide concealed approach to the enemy command position, Maria reflected on the irony of her situation. She had spent her military career developing expertise in explosive ordnance disposal, but now her survival depended on conventional infantry tactics that her specialized training had never emphasized. The drainage channel was deeper than Thompson's initial assessment had suggested, providing better concealment, but also creating new tactical challenges. The concrete walls channeled sound in unexpected ways, making it difficult to determine the location and distance of enemy positions based on audio cues alone. Moving through the murky water that flowed along the bottom of the channel, Maria used techniques she had learned during urban warfare training in Iraq. Each step had to be placed carefully to avoid creating noise that would reveal her position, and her movement rate was limited by the need to constantly assess threats from multiple directions. Above ground, Chen's robot continued its methodical approach to the first explosive array, providing the kind of predictable distraction that Maria's plan required. Through her earpiece, she could hear the subtle changes in enemy radio communications that indicated their full attention was focused on the EOD robot's activities. "Target is following standard approach protocols," an enemy voice reported in accented English. "Estimate 12 minutes until device interaction. All positions maintain observation discipline." The enemy's use of English and their detailed knowledge of American EOD timing confirmed Maria's suspicions about the sophisticated nature of the threat they were facing. This wasn't just about defeating a single team, it was about demonstrating capabilities that would force American forces to completely reconsider their operational assumptions. As she reached the halfway point of her approach, Maria encountered an obstacle that threatened to derail her entire plan. The drainage system was blocked by debris from recent flooding, forcing her to either abandon her concealed route or expose herself by climbing out of the channel. She studied the terrain around the blockage, looking for alternatives that wouldn't compromise her mission. The sides of the drainage channel were steep but climbable, leading to areas of sparse vegetation that might provide enough concealment for a short overland movement. Making the decision to proceed, Maria climbed out of the channel and began moving through the scrub brush that dotted the valley floor. Every step carried the risk of detection, but stopping would guarantee her team's destruction when the enemy activated their explosive array. Through her scope, Thompson was tracking her movement, while simultaneously maintaining observation of enemy positions. His radio discipline was perfect. No unnecessary communications, no movement that would draw attention to his position, no signs of the tactical impatience that could compromise the entire operation. "Overwatch has eyes on target movement," he reported using coded language that would be meaningless to enemy listeners. "Package delivery on schedule." Kim's coordination with Sarah's security element was equally professional, using routine administrative communications to convey tactical intelligence that painted a detailed picture of enemy capabilities and intentions. "Base, this is field unit. Equipment maintenance proceeding normally. Estimate 30 minutes for completion of scheduled activities," Kim reported, actually informing the forward operating base that enemy forces were positioned for a coordinated attack in approximately 30 minutes. But it was Chen's performance that impressed Maria most. Despite being the youngest and least experienced member of the team, she was executing robot operations with the kind of precision and tactical awareness that usually took years to develop. The robot's sensors were providing detailed intelligence about the explosive array's construction, while Chen's analysis revealed weaknesses in the enemy's detonation system that could be exploited if they could reach the primary command position. Maintenance supervisor, equipment is functioning within normal parameters, but I'm detecting some irregularities in the control systems, Chen reported, using technical language to describe the enemy's command structure. Recommend immediate supervisor consultation. Maria smiled despite the danger of her situation. Chen was telling her that the enemy's detonation system had vulnerabilities that could be exploited, but only if Maria could reach the command position and disable the primary controller. As she approached the ridgeline where enemy observers were positioned, Maria drew on lessons learned during countless training exercises and combat operations. The key to tactical movement wasn't avoiding all risk. It was managing risk in ways that your enemy couldn't predict or counter. The final 50 meters of her approach required crossing open ground that offered no concealment from enemy observation. Posts. Standard infantry tactics would call this movement impossible without supporting fires or diversionary actions. But Maria had learned that impossible was often just another word for unexpected. Instead of trying to avoid detection, she decided to move during a moment when enemy attention would naturally be focused elsewhere. Chen's robot was approaching the most dangerous part of its mission, requiring full concentration from enemy observers to ensure their detonation timing was perfect. Maria waited until the robot reached the primary explosive device, then began her final approach during the critical seconds when enemy attention was completely focused on their target. Her movement was fast, direct, and completely contrary to the careful, methodical approach that military doctrine recommended for such situations. The gamble worked. By the time enemy observers realized someone was approaching their command position, Maria was already close enough to engage with her sidearm before they could activate the detonation system that would destroy her team. But as she raised her weapon to engage the first enemy position, Maria realized that her assumptions about the enemy's tactical setup were dangerously incomplete. The command position she had identified was actually a decoy, designed to draw exactly the kind of flanking attack she was attempting. The real command position was located 50 meters further up the ridgeline, protected by additional security elements that she hadn't detected during her initial reconnaissance. Worse, her approach had been observed and reported, meaning the enemy now knew that American forces were capable of the kind of tactical innovation that their planning hadn't anticipated. All positions, American element has penetrated perimeter security, an enemy voice reported with professional calm. Initiate contingency protocol. Detonate secondary arrays on my command. Maria realized that her tactical innovation had actually accelerated the enemy's timeline rather than disrupting it. Instead of waiting for her team to approach the primary explosive array, they were now preparing to detonate backup devices that would achieve the same strategic objective while eliminating the threat her flanking movement represented. As enemy forces moved to engage her position, Maria found herself facing the kind of tactical situation that defined military careers, a moment when success or failure would be determined by decisions made under extreme pressure with incomplete information. She could attempt to withdraw and rejoin her team, accepting that their mission had failed, but preserving their lives for future operations. She could continue her attack on the real command position, knowing that success was unlikely but might disrupt enemy plans enough to save other American forces. Or she could do something that hadn't occurred to either her team or her enemies, something that would either demonstrate why Maria Santos had earned her reputation as a soldier who found solutions to impossible problems, or provide a final example of what happened when improvisation exceeded tactical reality. looking down at her team's position in the valley below. Maria saw Chen's robot approaching the moment when enemy forces would trigger their explosive array. Thompson and Kim were maintaining their assigned positions, but their tactical options were limited by the enemy's control of the high ground and superior numbers. Sarah's security element was positioned to provide supporting fires, but they were too far away to affect the immediate tactical situation. Air support was at least 20 minutes away, and artillery support was unavailable due to the proximity of civilian settlements. In that moment, Maria Santos made the decision that would define not only her military career, but her entire understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. Instead of following any tactical doctrine or predetermined plan, she decided to create a new solution based on her unique combination of skills, experience, and desperate creativity. The plan that formed in her mind was so unconventional that it would either be studied in military academies as an example of tactical innovation, or dismissed as the kind of desperate improvisation that had no place in professional military operations. But as Maria began implementing her new plan, she felt the cold confidence that had sustained her through 3 combat tours and dozens of life-or-death decisions. She wasn't just fighting for her team's survival, she was fighting to prove that American soldiers could adapt and overcome any threat, no matter how sophisticated or well-prepared. The enemy had studied American tactics and developed countermeasures for every standard response. Now they were about to discover what happened when an American soldier stopped following standard responses and started writing new ones in real time. As she moved toward the real enemy command position, Maria keyed her radio for what might be her final communication with her team. Chen, Thompson, Kim, execute emergency protocol 7 in 30 seconds. Trust me and be ready for anything. Emergency Protocol 7 didn't exist in any manual or training program. It was Maria's code for telling her team to prepare for the kind of tactical improvisation that would either save all their lives or end them together. Emergency Protocol 7 meant one thing: abandon all standard procedures and follow Maria's lead, no matter how insane her actions might appear. It was the tactical equivalent of a Hail Mary pass, reserved for situations where conventional approaches had failed and survival depended on doing something no one expected. Chen immediately understood the implications. She redirected the robot away from the explosive array it had been approaching, instead sending it toward a secondary position that would provide overwatch of Maria's approach to the enemy command position. The movement violated every principle of bomb disposal operations, but it would give Maria the tactical support she needed for whatever desperate plan she was implementing. Thompson shifted his observation from defensive overwatch to offensive targeting, identifying enemy positions that could threaten Maria's flanking movement. His rural Montana instincts had taught him to hunt in terrain where visibility was limited and targets were scarce, skills that translated perfectly to urban combat operations. Kim ceased his administrative communications with the forward operating base and began coordinating directly with Sarah's security element, preparing them for immediate action despite their distance from the main engagement area. His police experience had taught him that tactical situations could change in seconds, requiring instant adaptation and flawless execution. But Maria's plan required more than just tactical coordination. It required her team to trust her judgment even when they couldn't understand her reasoning. As she approached the real enemy command position, she was developing a solution that combined explosive ordnance disposal techniques with infantry tactics in ways that no training program had ever contemplated. The enemy command position was located in a natural depression that provided excellent concealment and fields of fire, but also created vulnerabilities that experienced military engineers would recognize. The same terrain features that protected the position from direct assault also channeled explosive effects in predictable ways. Maria studied the enemy position through her binoculars, noting the placement of personnel, equipment, and defensive measures. The command position included sophisticated communications equipment and electronic devices for controlling the explosive arrays, but it was manned by personnel who were focused on managing the complex technical operation rather than defending against close assault. Thompson, I need precise range and wind data for a 45-degree upward trajectory from my current position, she whispered into her radio. Using technical language that would sound routine to enemy listeners, Thompson's response came immediately. Range 420 meters, wind negligible, elevation angle confirms feasibility for standard operations. What Thompson was actually telling her was that a grenade thrown from her current position could reach the enemy command post, if she could achieve the proper trajectory and timing. It was a desperate solution that required perfect execution. But it was also the kind of unexpected approach that might succeed precisely because it was so unconventional. Maria checked her equipment, confirming that she still carried the M67 fragmentation grenades that were standard issue for close combat operations. She had thrown thousands of practice grenades during training, but never under conditions where a single miss would result in her team's destruction. As she prepared for what might be the most important throw of her military career, Maria reflected on the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in East L.A., she had learned to throw accurately by necessity. Hitting targets with rocks, bottles, or whatever else was available had sometimes meant the difference between escaping neighborhood troubles and facing consequences she couldn't handle. The Army had refined those childhood skills into military capabilities, teaching her to use grenades as tools for both offensive operations and defensive measures. But no training exercise had ever required her to make a precision throw under combat conditions. While enemy forces were actively trying to kill her, Chen's robot reached its new position and began providing the overwatch support Maria needed. Through the robot's sensors, Chen could observe enemy movements and provide real-time intelligence about their activities and defensive preparations. Supervisor, maintenance equipment is in position and providing full diagnostic capabilities, Chen reported, telling Maria that the robot was ready to support her attack. Thompson had identified 3 enemy positions that could engage Maria during her approach, but his own position allowed him to provide suppressive fire that would limit their effectiveness. His analysis of wind and terrain conditions confirmed that Maria's grenade throw was tactically feasible, though success would require perfect execution under combat stress. Kim's coordination with Sarah's security element had prepared them to provide supporting fires the moment Maria's attack began. Though they were too distant to affect the immediate tactical situation, their presence would prevent enemy reinforcements from responding to Maria's assault. But as Maria prepared to begin her final approach, she received intelligence that changed the entire tactical picture. Kim's monitoring of enemy communications revealed that the command position she was preparing to attack was about to relocate to an alternate site. All stations, primary control is moving to secondary position in 5 minutes. An enemy voice reported with professional efficiency. Maintain observation discipline during transition. Maria realized that her window of opportunity was closing rapidly. If the enemy command element moved to their backup position, her team would lose their only chance to disrupt the explosive array before it was detonated. Worse, the new position might be located where her grenade attack wouldn't be feasible. Instead of waiting for perfect conditions, Maria decided to attack immediately, accepting the increased risks in exchange for tactical surprise. Her approach would be faster and more direct than originally planned, but it would also be more dangerous and less likely to succeed. As she began moving toward the enemy position, Maria felt the familiar combination of fear and determination that had sustained her through countless dangerous situations. Every step carried the risk of detection and immediate engagement by enemy forces, but stopping would guarantee her team's destruction. The terrain between her current position and the enemy command post offered limited concealment, forcing her to move in short rushes between patches of cover. Each movement required careful timing to avoid enemy observation periods, and her progress was slower than the tactical situation demanded. Through her earpiece, she could hear her team's professional communications as they provided support for her attack. Chen was using the robot to create diversions that drew enemy attention away from Maria's approach. Thompson was providing precise intelligence about enemy movements and defensive measures. Kim was coordinating with external support elements to ensure Maria's attack would be supported by all available resources, but it was Sarah Mitchell's voice that provided the encouragement Maria needed as she prepared for the final phase of her assault. "Santos, this is Mitchell. Whatever you're planning, we're ready to support. Trust your instincts and do what you do best." As Maria reached the final covered position before her grenade throw, she took a moment to assess the tactical situation one last time. The enemy command position was exactly where Thompson's analysis had indicated, with personnel and equipment arranged in patterns that confirmed their focus on technical operations rather than close defense. The distance and elevation angle were within the parameters she had calculated, but combat conditions would affect her accuracy in ways that training exercises couldn't replicate. Enemy fire, physical stress, and time pressure would all influence her ability to make the precise throw that success required. Maria pulled the pin from her first grenade and prepared to make the throw that would either save her team or provide a final demonstration of what happened when desperate courage met tactical reality. As she rose from her concealed position, enemy observers immediately detected her movement and began engaging with small arms fire. The first grenade left her hand with perfect form and trajectory, arcing through the morning air toward the enemy command position. But as it flew toward its target, Maria realized that her tactical calculations had been based on incomplete information about the enemy's defensive preparations. The command position included overhead cover that she hadn't detected during her reconnaissance, meaning her grenade would detonate above the target rather than inside it. The explosion would cause casualties and disruption, but it wouldn't disable the communications equipment or prevent the enemy from detonating their explosive array. As enemy return fire forced her back into cover, Maria realized that her attack had achieved tactical surprise but failed to accomplish its strategic objective. The enemy command structure was damaged but still functional, and her position was now known to all enemy forces in the area. But instead of despair, Maria felt the cold anger that had sustained her through every impossible situation she had ever faced. The enemy had prepared for conventional attacks and standard procedures, but they hadn't prepared for a soldier who refused to accept failure as a final answer. Drawing her second grenade, Maria began planning an attack that would either complete her mission or ensure that her sacrifice served a meaningful purpose. This time, she would use techniques that no military manual had ever described, combining explosive ordnance disposal knowledge with infantry tactics in ways that would either save her team or provide a final lesson about the costs of tactical innovation. As she prepared for what might be her final attack, Maria Santos reflected on the journey that had brought her from the streets of East L.A. to a mountainside in Afghanistan. Facing enemies who had studied every aspect of American military capabilities except the most important one, the willingness of individual soldiers to exceed every reasonable expectation of human performance when the lives of their teammates depended on their actions. The enemy had planned for everything except the possibility that an American soldier would refuse to accept the tactical limitations they had imposed. Now they were about to discover what happened when planning met the kind of desperate innovation that emerged from 3 combat tours and a lifetime of overcoming impossible odds. Maria's second attack would either demonstrate why she had earned her reputation as a soldier who found solutions to unsolvable problems, or provide a final example of what American soldiers were willing to sacrifice for each other and their mission. As enemy fire intensified around her position, Maria prepared to prove that the most dangerous thing an enemy could face wasn't American technology or tactics. It was an American soldier who had decided that failure wasn't an acceptable option. The second grenade's explosion echoed across the valley like thunder, but Maria knew immediately that it had also failed to disable the enemy command position. Through the smoke and debris, she could see enemy personnel regrouping and maintaining control of their communications equipment. Her desperate assault had caused casualties and confusion, but it hadn't achieved the tactical objective her teams. Survival required. Enemy return fire was now concentrated on her position with deadly accuracy, forcing her to remain behind cover that was rapidly being degraded by sustained small arms fire. Rocky fragments and metal splinters filled the air around her, and she could feel the impact vibrations as rounds struck the boulder that provided her only protection. "Santos, report your status." Thompson's voice carried the tension of someone watching his team leader come under effective enemy fire. From his overwatch position, he could see Maria's tactical situation deteriorating rapidly as enemy forces maneuvered to surround her position. "I'm pinned down but mobile," Maria replied, though mobility was rapidly becoming theoretical as enemy fire intensified. "Execute Contingency Plan Delta. Get the team out of here." Contingency Plan Delta was her code for tactical withdrawal without her a plan none of her team members had any intention of implementing. Instead of retreating, Chen began maneuvering the robot toward Maria's position to provide covering fire and tactical support. "Negative on Delta." Chen's voice carried the firm determination of someone who had decided that abandoning teammates wasn't an acceptable option. "We're coming to get you." But as Chen's robot approached Maria's position, enemy forces revealed capabilities that intelligence reports had completely failed to identify. Instead of just small arms and traditional weapons, they deployed an improvised explosive device specifically designed to disable American military robots, the explosion. That disabled Chen's robot also revealed the true scope of the trap Maria's team had walked into. This wasn't just about testing new explosive technologies or demonstrating tactical capabilities. It was about capturing or killing specific American personnel whose expertise posed strategic threats to enemy operations. "All stations priority. Target is isolated and vulnerable." An enemy voice reported with professional satisfaction. "Initiate capture protocol. Command wants the female sergeant alive for interrogation." The implications of that transmission struck Maria like a physical blow. The enemy hadn't just studied her team's procedures, they had studied her personally, identifying her as a high-value target whose capture would provide strategic intelligence. About American explosive ordnance disposal capabilities, Thompson's analysis confirmed her fears. "Ma'am, they're moving to surround your position with capture equipment. This entire operation was designed to take you alive." The tactical picture was now completely clear, and it was worse than Maria's most paranoid assumptions. Enemy forces had orchestrated an elaborate scenario to capture an experienced EOD specialist who could provide detailed information about American bomb disposal techniques, equipment capabilities, and operational procedures. Kim's intelligence intercepts revealed additional details that painted an even grimmer picture. "Santos, they're talking about ransoming you back to American forces in exchange for tactical concessions. This isn't just about intelligence, it's about demonstrating they can capture our best people whenever they want." As enemy forces continued their approach, Maria realized that her capture would compromise not just her own team, but every EOD unit operating in Afghanistan. The techniques she had developed, the innovations she had implemented, and the tactical knowledge she had accumulated over 3 combat tours would all become weapons in enemy hands. Looking down at the valley where her team was positioned, Maria saw Chen, Thompson, and Kim preparing to attempt a rescue operation that would almost certainly result in all their deaths. Their loyalty was absolute, but their tactical options were limited by the enemy's superior numbers and advantageous positions. Sarah, Mitchell's security element was moving to provide support, but they were too distant to affect the immediate tactical situation. Air support remained 20 minutes away, and ground reinforcements were even more distant. Maria's team was effectively alone, facing an enemy force that had prepared specifically for this encounter. But as Maria assessed her tactical situation, she noticed something that enemy planners might not have anticipated. Her position on the ridgeline provided her with direct observation of the primary explosive array that threatened her team, and her EOD training had taught her to recognize vulnerabilities in even the most sophisticated devices. The enemy's detonation system was designed to be triggered from the command position she had been attacking, but it also included backup systems that could be activated by secondary controllers. More importantly, the entire array appeared to be connected by a network of wires and electronic components that followed predictable engineering principles. Maria studied the explosive array through her binoculars, applying 3 tours' worth of experience in identifying and defeating improvised explosive devices. What she saw confirmed a possibility that might save her team, even if it cost her own life. The enemy had made the array too sophisticated for its own good. Instead of simple devices that could be triggered independently, they had created a complex system that was vulnerable to cascade failures if key components were damaged or destroyed. But exploiting that vulnerability would require her to expose herself to direct enemy fire while attempting to hit specific targets at maximum range with her remaining grenades. Success would require the kind of precision throwing that she had never attempted under combat conditions, and failure would result in her capture and her team's destruction. As enemy forces closed on her position, Maria made the calculation that would define the rest of her military career. Instead of allowing herself to be captured or attempting to escape, she would use her final moments of freedom to attack the explosive array directly, creating the kind of cascade failure that would disable the entire system. "Team, this is Santos," she radioed, using clear language because tactical deception was no longer possible. "I'm going to attack the primary array directly. When I do, you'll have approximately 30 seconds to clear the valley before secondary explosions begin." Thompson's response was immediate and predictable. "Ma'am, that's suicide. The range is too great, and you'll be completely exposed to enemy fire." "Maybe," Maria replied, checking her remaining grenades and calculating distances and trajectories. "But it's also the only way to ensure you get out of here alive." Chen's voice carried the professional calm she had learned from watching Maria handle impossible situations. "Sergeant Santos, if you're determined to do this, let us provide supporting fire to improve your chances." Kim's tactical analysis was equally professional. "Ma'am, if you wait 60 seconds, Mitchell's element will be in position to provide suppressive fire during your attack." But Maria knew that waiting 60 seconds would allow enemy forces to reach her position and eliminate her ability to make the attack entirely. This was one of those tactical situations where success required immediate action, regardless of the personal costs involved. As she prepared for what might be her final military action, Maria reflected on the conversation she'd had with Sarah Mitchell about sharing her gifts instead of just using them. In a few moments, she would either demonstrate the kind of tactical innovation that kept American forces ahead of their enemies, or provide a final lesson about what happened when improvisation exceeded tactical reality. Drawing her third grenade, Maria began the mental calculations that would determine whether her sacrifice served a meaningful purpose. Distance to target, wind conditions, elevation angle, and timing all had to be perfect for her attack to succeed in disabling the explosive array. But as she prepared to expose herself to enemy fire for what might be the last time, Maria realized that her tactical situation included one element that enemy planners couldn't have anticipated. The injury to her right hand from the earlier explosion had forced her to adapt her throwing technique in ways that might actually improve her accuracy under these specific conditions. Her left hand had always been stronger and more coordinated, than military training programs assumed. A legacy of growing up in circumstances where adaptability meant survival. Now that same adaptability might provide the tactical advantage her mission required. As enemy forces reached the final approach to her position, Maria Santos prepared to prove that the most dangerous enemy any force could face was an American soldier who had decided that mission accomplishment was more important than personal survival. The throw she was about to attempt would either save her team and demonstrate why American forces remain tactically superior to any enemy, or provide a final example of what happened when courage exceeded tactical possibility. Either way, Maria Santos was about to show her enemies what they had unleashed when they decided to target American soldiers who had learned that impossible was just another word for challenging. Enemy voices were now clearly audible as they coordinated their final approach. But Maria felt the cold calm that had sustained her through 3 combat tours and dozens of life-or-death decisions. She wasn't just fighting for her team's survival, she was fighting to prove that American soldiers could overcome any threat through a combination of training, courage, and the kind of desperate innovation that emerged when failure wasn't an acceptable option. As she rose from cover for what might be her final attack, Maria Santos discovered that everything she had learned about explosive ordnance disposal, infantry tactics, and human determination was about to be tested in ways that no training program could have prepared her for. The grenade in her left hand represented more than just explosive potential. It represented 3 combat tours, countless hours of training, and a lifetime of refusing to accept limitations that other people tried to impose. CTA number 3. We're approaching the climactic moments of this epic tale, and the tension is at its peak. Creating stories of this scope and detail requires not just writing talent, but careful plotting, character development, and attention to every narrative thread. We've journeyed through nearly 40,000 words together, and I hope every moment has kept you engaged. If this story has drawn you in and kept you listening, please show your appreciation by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Share this epic with anyone who loves immersive storytelling and hit that notification bell for more incredible adventures. Now let's witness how everything comes together in these final, crucial moments. Maria rose from cover, knowing that enemy forces were less than 50 meters away and closing fast. The morning sun caught the metal of their weapons as they moved, with the disciplined coordination of professional soldiers, not the chaotic rush of typical insurgent fighters. But Maria Santos had spent 3 combat tours learning that professional enemies just meant you had to be more professional in your response. The grenade felt different in her left hand, heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of every decision that had brought her to this moment. Her right hand hung useless at her side, the injury from the earlier explosion serving as a constant reminder that conventional approaches had already failed. She studied the explosive array one final time, identifying the central node that connected all the secondary devices. The enemy had made their system sophisticated enough to be reliable, but that same sophistication created a single point of failure that could be exploited. If she could hit a target the size of a briefcase from 400 meters away while under direct enemy fire. Thompson, Kim, Chen, when I make this throw, you have 30 seconds to clear the valley floor, Maria radioed, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who had accepted the costs of her decision. Don't look back, don't hesitate, and don't try to come back for me. Thompson's response came immediately. Ma'am, we're not leaving you behind. That's an order, soldier, Maria replied, using the tone of voice that had carried her through 3 tours of keeping young soldiers alive in impossible situations. Your job is to get back to base and report what we've learned here. The intelligence about enemy capabilities is worth more than any individual soldier. But even as she spoke, Maria knew her team would ignore her orders if they thought there was any chance of saving her. That kind of loyalty was what made American military units effective, but it was also what got good soldiers killed trying to save teammates who couldn't be saved. Enemy forces were now close enough that she could hear individual voices coordinating their assault. Their tactical discipline was impressive. No shouting, no wasted movement, no signs of the excitement that usually accompanied successful operations. They moved with the confidence of professionals who had planned thoroughly and were now executing flawlessly. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Priority target is isolated and vulnerable, one voice reported in accented English. Estimate 30 seconds until capture completion. Maria allowed herself a cold smile. They were counting on capturing her alive to extract intelligence about American EOD capabilities, which meant they would be reluctant to use lethal force until she had actually thrown the grenade. That reluctance might provide the fraction of a second she needed to complete her throw. Checking the wind direction one final time, Maria calculated the trajectory required to hit the central node of the explosive array. The throw would require her to expose herself completely to enemy fire while achieving precision that she had never attempted under combat conditions. But as she prepared to make the throw that would either save her team or provide a final demonstration of American military determination, Maria heard something that changed her entire tactical calculation. "Santos, this is Mitchell. We've got eyes on your position and we're moving to support. Hold your position for 60 seconds. Through her earpiece, Maria could hear the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. Air support was arriving ahead of schedule, which meant her desperate assault might not be necessary after all. But enemy forces had also heard the approaching helicopters, and their tactical response was immediate and professional. Instead of continuing their careful approach, they began preparing to eliminate Maria before air support could affect the tactical situation. All stations, priority target must be neutralized immediately. An enemy commander ordered with professional urgency. Execute lethal force authorization. The change in enemy tactics eliminated Maria's window of opportunity for a careful, precise throw. Instead of having time to line up her shot and calculate trajectory, she would have to make her attack while enemy forces were actively trying to kill her. But Maria Santos had spent 3 combat tours learning that perfect conditions were a luxury that combat soldiers rarely enjoyed. Success usually required making the best possible decisions with incomplete information. Under extreme pressure. As enemy forces opened fire with sustained automatic weapons, Maria forced herself to remain calm and focused on the technical requirements of her throw. Distance, wind, elevation, timing, all the factors that determined success had to be processed and calculated while bullets filled the air around her position. The first rounds struck the rocks near her head, sending sharp fragments flying in all directions. One piece of stone opened a cut across her cheek, but Maria ignored the pain and focused on identifying the exact moment when her throw would have the best chance of success. That moment came when enemy fire briefly shifted to engage the approaching helicopters, providing her with approximately 3 seconds of reduced pressure. It wasn't enough time for a careful, deliberate throw, but it was enough for a soldier who had learned to adapt quickly to changing tactical conditions. Maria rose from cover and released the grenade in a single fluid motion, using the same left-handed throwing technique she had perfected growing up in East L.A. when accuracy meant the difference between escaping trouble and facing consequences. She couldn't handle. The grenade arced through the morning air with perfect trajectory, spinning slowly as it followed the ballistic path toward the explosive array's central node. For a moment that seemed to last forever, Maria watched her throw carry the hopes of her entire team toward a target that represented their only chance of survival. Enemy fire immediately concentrated on her exposed position, but Maria forced herself to remain standing long enough to observe the results of her throw. If the grenade missed its target, she would have time for one more attempt before enemy forces overwhelmed her position. The explosion that followed her grenade's impact was exactly what Maria had hoped to see, a sharp, focused detonation that destroyed the central node and triggered the cascade failure she had identified as the enemy's vulnerability. Secondary explosions began immediately as the sophisticated detonation system began failing in exactly the way Maria's EOD training had taught her to predict. Instead of a coordinated array of devices timed to maximize damage, the enemy's explosive network became a chaotic series of uncontrolled detonations that posed more danger to enemy forces than to American personnel. But Maria's moment of tactical success was interrupted by the impact of enemy rounds that finally found their target. The first bullet struck her left shoulder, spinning her around and sending her crashing into the rocky ground. The second round caught her in the leg, and she felt the familiar sensation of combat injuries that would require immediate medical attention. As enemy forces moved to finish their assault, Maria drew her sidearm with her uninjured left hand and prepared to make her final contribution to the tactical situation. She might not survive the next few minutes, but she would ensure that enemy forces paid the maximum possible price for their victory. But the sound of approaching helicopters was growing louder, and Maria realized that her sacrifice might have bought enough time for air support to arrive and save her team. Through the pain and confusion of her injuries, she felt a surge of satisfaction that her desperate gamble had achieved its primary objective. Chen's voice crackled through her earpiece with professional calm that reminded Maria of herself at that age. Sergeant Santos, maintain your position. Air support is engaging enemy forces, and medical evacuation is inbound. Thompson's report confirmed that Maria's attack on the explosive array had achieved complete success. Ma'am, secondary explosions have neutralized the entire enemy network. The valley is clear for friendly movement. Kim's coordination with the arriving air support was flawless, providing target identification and tactical guidance that allowed the helicopters to engage enemy forces with maximum effectiveness while avoiding friendly fire incidents. But it was Sarah Mitchell's voice that provided the encouragement Maria needed as she fought to remain conscious despite her injuries. Santos, this is Mitchell. Outstanding work, soldier. You just saved not only your team, but probably dozens of other units that would have faced this same threat. As medical helicopters landed in the valley to evacuate casualties, Maria reflected on the path that had brought her from the streets of East L.A. to a mountainside in Afghanistan, where her unconventional approach to impossible problems had proven more effective than any textbook solution. Her injured right hand had forced her to adapt techniques that ultimately proved more effective than standard procedures. Her willingness to ignore conventional tactical wisdom had created opportunities that careful planning couldn't have anticipated. Her refusal to accept limitations that others tried to impose had turned apparent failure into unexpected success. Most importantly, her determination to protect her team had demonstrated the kind of leadership that inspired other soldiers to exceed their own expectations of what was possible under impossible circumstances. As medics worked to stabilize her injuries, Maria watched Chen, Thompson, and Kim coordinating the recovery of intelligence materials from the destroyed enemy positions. They moved with the professional competence she had taught them, but also with the tactical innovation that would carry them through their own future challenges. The enemy had studied American procedures and planned accordingly, but they hadn't anticipated the possibility that an American soldier would abandon those procedures entirely and create new solutions in real time. That failure to understand the adaptability and innovation of American soldiers had cost them a carefully planned operation and demonstrated capabilities they had hoped to keep secret. As the medical evacuation helicopter lifted off with Maria secured to a stretcher, she could see the smoke rising from the destroyed enemy positions and the scattered remnants of what had been a sophisticated explosive array. her left-handed grenade throw had accomplished what months of planning and conventional tactics might have failed to achieve. 6 months later, Walter Reed Army Medical Center buzzed with the controlled activity of a military hospital where wounded warriors came to heal and adapt to new realities. Maria Santos sat in the physical therapy wing, working with her left hand to regain the fine motor control that explosive ordnance disposal required, while her right hand remained largely immobile. Despite multiple surgeries, the injuries from that morning in Afghanistan had effectively ended her career as an active EOD specialist, but they had also launched her into a new role that no one had anticipated: the technique she had developed for left-handed bomb disposal. Operations were now being studied and refined by military training programs throughout the armed forces. The thing about adaptation, she explained to the class of young EOD specialists who had gathered to learn from her experience, is that it's not just about overcoming limitations. It's about discovering capabilities you never knew you had. The students listened with the intense attention of people who understood that the lessons Maria was teaching might save their lives in future operations. Her reputation had grown far beyond her original specialty, encompassing tactical innovation, leadership under extreme pressure, and the kind of problem-solving that emerged when conventional approaches failed. Dr. Sarah Chen, the former specialist, Chen, who had operated the bomb disposal robot during that desperate morning, was now completing her advanced degree in robotics engineering while serving as Maria's research partner. Their collaboration was developing new technologies that would make EOD operations safer and more effective for future generations of soldiers. The left-handed throwing technique Sergeant Santos developed has applications beyond just combat situations. Dr. Chen explained during their joint presentation to military leadership. We're adapting the principles for robotic systems that can operate effectively even when primary systems are compromised. Thompson had been promoted to staff sergeant and was now training new EE teams at Fort Lee, using lessons learned from his experience in Afghanistan to prepare soldiers for threats that traditional training programs hadn't anticipated. His ability to think like an insurgent bomb maker had proven invaluable for developing countermeasures against increasingly sophisticated enemy devices. Kim had returned to civilian law enforcement, but maintained his military connections as a consultant on issues involving the intersection of criminal investigation and military intelligence. His analysis of the security breach that had compromised their mission had led to significant improvements in operational security protocols throughout the armed forces. But it was during a ceremony at the Pentagon that Maria truly understood the broader implications of what had happened that morning in the Afghan Valley. Standing before an audience that included senior military leadership, intelligence officials, and wounded veterans, she received the Distinguished Service Cross for her actions in destroying the enemy explosive array and saving not only her team, but potentially dozens of other units that might have faced similar threats. Staff Sergeant Santos demonstrated the kind of tactical innovation and personal courage that exemplifies the best traditions of the United States Army. The citation. Read. Her willingness to adapt standard procedures to meet unprecedented challenges, combined with her absolute commitment to her teammates' safety, represents the highest ideals of military service. But the formal recognition, while meaningful, was less important to Maria than the knowledge that her experience was being used to train and protect other soldiers. The tactical lessons learned from that desperate morning were now part of standard EOD training, and the intelligence gathered from the destroyed enemy positions had prevented similar operations throughout the region. During the reception following the ceremony, Maria found herself in conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Davidson, who had flown in from Afghanistan specifically to attend the event. His perspective on the strategic implications of her actions provided context that she hadn't fully appreciated while living through the tactical situation. What you and your team discovered that morning changed our entire understanding of enemy capabilities and intentions, Davidson explained. The sophistication of their planning and the extent of their intelligence penetration forced us to completely reconsider our operational security and tactical procedures. The investigation that followed Maria's mission had revealed a network of enemy intelligence operations that extended far beyond Afghanistan, involving foreign military advisors and sophisticated technological support that previous assessments had failed to identify. The intelligence Maria's team had gathered, both through their tactical innovations and their successful defense, had disrupted enemy operations throughout the region. But perhaps most importantly, Maria's example had inspired a new generation of military leaders to think beyond conventional tactical solutions when facing unprecedented challenges. Her willingness to abandon standard procedures and create new approaches in real time had become a case study in military academies and professional development programs. Sarah Mitchell, now promoted to major and commanding a military police battalion, had traveled from Fort Bragg to attend the ceremony. During a quiet moment between official events, she and Maria reflected on the conversation they had shared months earlier about the importance of sharing gifts rather than just using them. "You've done more than just survive an impossible situation," Sarah observed. "You've created a legacy that will protect and inspire soldiers for generations to come." Maria appreciated the recognition, but her mind was already focused on future challenges and opportunities. The injury to her right hand had forced her to discover capabilities she hadn't known she possessed, and she was determined to continue that process of adaptation and innovation in her new role as an instructor and researcher. The program she was developing at the EOD school would teach not just the technical aspects of bomb disposal, but the kind of tactical thinking that allowed soldiers to create new solutions when conventional approaches failed. Students would learn to operate effectively with both hands, to think creatively under pressure, and to maintain mission focus even when everything seemed to be going wrong. But the most important lesson Maria wanted to convey was something that couldn't be taught through formal instruction: the understanding that limitations were often just starting points for innovation, and that the most dangerous enemies any force could face were soldiers who refused to accept that failure was an acceptable option. During her final address to the EOD school's graduating class, Maria shared the insight that had sustained her through 3 combat tours and countless dangerous situations. "The enemy will always study our procedures and develop countermeasures for our standard responses," she explained. "But they can't prepare for soldiers who are willing to abandon those standards and create new solutions in real time." The graduates listened with the intense attention of people who understood they were receiving more than just technical training. They were being prepared to think and adapt in ways that would keep them ahead of any enemy they might face. As the ceremony concluded and the new EOD specialists prepared for their first assignments, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from the streets of East L.A. to a position where her experience and insights were shaping the future of explosive ordnance disposal operations. Her wounded right hand would always serve as a reminder of the costs of tactical innovation, but her undamaged left hand had proven capable of achievements that exceeded anything she had accomplished using conventional techniques. The injury that was supposed to disqualify her from continued service had actually revealed capabilities that no training program could have anticipated. Standing in the classroom where she now taught the next generation of EOD specialists, Maria could see in their faces the same hunger for excellence and commitment to their teammates that had driven her own military career. They would face threats and challenges that she couldn't predict, but they would face them with the confidence that came from understanding that adaptation and innovation were more powerful than any enemy weapon. The story of her left-handed grenade throw had become legendary within the EOD community, but Maria knew the real lesson wasn't about throwing accuracy or tactical innovation. It was about the willingness to exceed every reasonable expectation of human performance when the mission and your teammates' lives depended on your actions. As she prepared for her next class, Maria Santos reflected on the truth that had guided her entire military career. The most important qualification for any soldier wasn't perfect training or flawless equipment. It was the determination to find ways to succeed when success seemed impossible, and the courage to implement those solutions, regardless of personal cost. Her wounded hand had indeed disqualified her from active EOD operations, but it had also qualified her for something more important, the role of teaching other soldiers that limitations were just opportunities to discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. The grenade she had thrown with her left hand that morning in Afghanistan had saved 12 American lives and disrupted enemy operations throughout the region. But the lessons learned from that desperate innovation would continue saving lives for decades to come, as new generations of soldiers learned that the most effective weapon any military could possess was the willingness of individual soldiers to exceed every limitation that enemies tried to impose. 3 years after that morning in the Afghan valley, Maria Santos stood before a joint session of military leadership from all branches of the armed forces, presenting research that would revolutionize explosive ordnance disposal training and tactics. Her injury had ended one career, but launched another that would have far greater impact on American military capabilities. The tactical innovation she had developed under extreme pressure were now standard components of EOD training programs, and the leadership principles she had demonstrated were being studied in military academies around the world. But most importantly, her example had inspired countless other soldiers to approach impossible situations with the confidence that American military personnel could adapt and overcome any challenge through a combination of training, courage, and innovative thinking. As she concluded her presentation and prepared to return to her duties at the EOD school, Maria felt the satisfaction that came from knowing her experience was continuing to serve a meaningful purpose. The morning that had nearly ended her life had actually launched the most important phase of her military career, proving that sometimes the greatest victories emerged from apparent defeat. Her right hand might never regain full function, but her left hand had proven capable of achievements that exceeded anything conventional training could have predicted. The injury that was supposed to disqualify her had actually qualified her for a role that would influence military operations for generations to come. Standing in the Pentagon briefing room where her tactical innovations were being adopted as standard procedures, Maria Santos understood that her journey from the streets of East L.A. to the mountains of Afghanistan had prepared her for something far more important than individual heroism: the opportunity to ensure that future American soldiers would be better prepared, better trained, and better equipped to face whatever challenges awaited them. The enemy had studied American procedures and planned accordingly, but they had failed to account for the most important element of American military capability: the willingness of individual soldiers to exceed every expectation and limitation when their mission and their teammates' lives depended on their performance. That willingness couldn't be captured in intelligence reports or countered by tactical planning, because it represented something fundamental about the character of American military personnel that no enemy could fully understand or effectively defeat. Maria's wounded hand served as a constant reminder that tactical innovation came with costs. But her success in overcoming those limitations demonstrated that American soldiers possessed capabilities that no enemy could anticipate or prepare for. The grenade thrown with her left hand had saved 12 lives that morning in Afghanistan, but the lessons learned from that desperate innovation would continue protecting American forces for decades to come. As she returned to Fort Lee to continue training the next generation of EOD specialists, Maria carried with her the knowledge that her greatest contribution to American military capabilities wasn't the tactical innovation she had developed under pressure. It was proving that limitations were just starting points for discovering new possibilities. and that the most dangerous enemy any force could face was a soldier who refused to accept that failure was an acceptable option. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground at Fort Lee as Colonel Maria Santos, her promotion head, come with her new assignment as Director of Advanced EOD Training, reviewed the final preparations for the most significant ceremony in the school's history. Today marked the 5th anniversary of what military historians now called the Santos Innovation, and the dedication of the new Left-Hand Combat Training Center. Standing at her office window, Maria watched as hundreds of EOD specialists from around the world gathered for the international symposium that had grown out of her tactical innovations. Representatives from NATO allies, special operations forces, and civilian bomb disposal units had come to study techniques that had evolved far beyond that desperate morning in Afghanistan. Her right hand, though still limited in function, had regained enough mobility to handle administrative duties, while her left hand had become something of a legend in military circles. The precision and strength she had developed through necessity had been refined through years of training, creating capabilities that exceeded what anyone had thought possible for non-dominant hand. OPERATIONS. Dr. Sarah Chen entered the office, carrying a stack of research papers that represented the latest developments in their ongoing collaboration. Now holding a doctorate in military engineering and serving as the school's chief of innovation, Chen had transformed Maria's battlefield adaptations into scientific principles that were revolutionizing how the military approached adaptive training. The preliminary results from the Australian program are remarkable, Chen announced, setting the papers on Maria's desk. Their adoption of ambidextrous EOD training has reduced casualties by 43% in the past 18 months. The Canadian forces are reporting similar success rates. Maria smiled as she reviewed the data that confirmed what she had learned through painful experience, that limitations often contained the seeds of unexpected capabilities. The injury that was supposed to end her career had actually launched innovations that were protecting soldiers around the world. Any word from Thompson about the field trials in Syria? Maria asked, referring to Master Sergeant Marcus Thompson, who now led an elite E-8 unit specializing in the kind of unconventional tactics that Maria's experience had pioneered. He reports complete success with the new dual-hand protocols. Chen replied. His team cleared a complex IED network last week using techniques that wouldn't have existed if you hadn't been forced to adapt that morning in the valley. The ripple effects of Maria's innovation extended far beyond explosive ordnance disposal. Military medical programs now included comprehensive training for wounded warriors who needed to develop new capabilities, and leadership courses throughout. The armed forces studied her example of turning apparent defeat into strategic advantage. Kim had returned to military service as a lieutenant colonel, specializing in intelligence security, using lessons learned from their compromised mission to develop new protocols that prevented enemy infiltration of American operations. His work had saved countless lives by ensuring that tactical innovations remained protected, while still being disseminated to units that needed them. But it was during her morning briefing that Maria learned about developments that reminded her why her work remained critically important. Intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces throughout the Middle East and Central Asia had adapted their own tactics in response to American innovations, creating new threats that required continued tactical evolution. They're specifically targeting EOD specialists who show signs of tactical innovation, reported Major Kim during his video conference from Kabul. It seems your example inspired other soldiers to think creatively, which makes them high value targets for enemy forces. Maria felt the familiar combination of pride and concern that had defined her military career. Her innovations were protecting American soldiers, but they were also painting larger targets on the most creative and adaptable personnel. Success in warfare always generated new challenges that required continued adaptation and innovation. Ceremony that afternoon drew the largest gathering of explosive ordnance disposal specialists in military history. Representatives from every branch of the U.S. Armed Forces, allied militaries from 37 countries, and civilian agencies from around the world had come to witness the dedication of facilities that would train future generations in the principles Maria had discovered through necessity. Standing at the podium before an audience that included senior military leadership, wounded veterans, and young soldiers who were just beginning their EOD careers, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her from a desperate situation in an Afghan valley to a position where her experience was shaping global military doctrine. 5 years ago, I learned that limitations are often just invitations to discover capabilities we never knew we possessed. She began, her voice carrying across the silent assembly. Today, we dedicate facilities that will ensure future soldiers are prepared to find those capabilities before they need them in combat. The Left-Hand Combat Training Center represented more than just physical facilities. It embodied a philosophical approach to military training that emphasized adaptability, innovation, and the kind of creative problem-solving that emerged when conventional approaches failed. Students would learn not just technical skills, but the mental flexibility that allowed soldiers to create new solutions under extreme pressure. But the most moving moment of the ceremony came when Sarah Mitchell, now a colonel commanding a military police brigade, presented Maria with a plaque that had been signed by every member of her original team, along with the families of soldiers who had been saved by the tactical innovations that grew out of their experience. To Staff Sergeant Santos, who taught us that the most dangerous thing an enemy can face is an American soldier who refuses to accept that failure is an acceptable option. The inscription read, "Your example continues to inspire and protect warriors around the world." As the formal ceremony concluded and attendees moved to the demonstration areas where current students were showcasing the latest techniques, Maria found herself in conversation with a young lieutenant whose enthusiasm reminded her of Chen at that age. "Ma'am, I've studied your tactical innovation since I was in high school," Lieutenant Jennifer Rodriguez explained. "Your example is the reason I chose EOD as my specialty. I wanted to be the kind of soldier who could find solutions when conventional approaches failed." Maria appreciated the recognition, but she also recognized the responsibility that came with inspiring young soldiers to pursue dangerous careers. "Lieutenant, the most important thing to remember is that innovation without judgment gets people killed. Creative thinking has to be balanced with tactical discipline and absolute commitment to your teammates' safety." The conversation reminded Maria of her own early enthusiasm and the mentors who had shaped her understanding of what it meant to be a professional soldier. Now she found herself in the position of providing that guidance to new generations of warriors who would face threats she couldn't predict, using techniques that hadn't been invented yet. During the evening reception, Maria was approached by Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a civilian researcher who had been studying the psychological aspects of adaptive performance under extreme stress. Her work was contributing to training programs that prepared soldiers for the kind of mental flexibility that combat situations demanded. "Your experience has provided insights that extend far beyond military applications," Dr. Warren explained. "We're seeing applications in emergency response, medical procedures, and any field where professionals need to maintain performance when primary capabilities are compromised." The broader implications of her tactical innovations were something Maria had never anticipated during that desperate morning in Afghanistan. What had begun as a soldier's attempt to save her team had evolved into principles that were improving performance in fields ranging from surgery to firefighting to disaster response. But perhaps the most significant development was the establishment of the Santos Fellowship Program, which brought wounded veterans from allied nations to Fort Lee for specialized training in adaptive techniques. The program recognized that physical limitations often contained the potential for exceptional performance if soldiers were given the proper training and support. The first international class of Santos Fellows included a British soldier who had lost his dominant hand to an IED in Iraq, a Canadian veteran who had suffered traumatic brain injury that affected his coordination, and an Australian explosive specialist who had been told her vision injuries would end her military career. The thing about adaptation, Maria explained to the fellows during their orientation, is that it's not about overcoming limitations. It's about discovering that what you thought were limitations were actually just different ways of approaching the same challenges. Over the following months, the fellows would learn not just technical skills, but the mental framework that allowed soldiers to maintain peak performance even when conventional approaches were no longer available. They would study Maria's tactical innovations, but more importantly, they would learn to develop their own creative solutions to unprecedented challenges. The program's success exceeded every expectation, with fellows returning to their home countries and implementing adaptations that improved performance throughout their military organizations. The Australian fellow developed new techniques for operating with limited vision that revolutionized how her unit approached dangerous environments. The British soldier created ambidextrous training protocols that became standard throughout the Royal Engineers, but it was during a field exercise 18 months later that Maria witnessed the most dramatic validation of her approach to adaptive training. A team of recent graduates was conducting live-fire training when their primary equipment failed, leaving them with limited capabilities in a situation that required immediate action. Instead of calling for backup or waiting for equipment replacement, the team implemented adaptive techniques they had learned at the Santos Center, creating improvised solutions that not only completed their mission but demonstrated capabilities that exceeded what traditional training programs could have achieved. They're not just adapting to equipment failure, observed Colonel Davidson, who had traveled from the Pentagon to witness the exercise. They're creating new capabilities that our enemies couldn't have anticipated or prepared for. Watching the exercise, Maria felt the same pride she had experienced when her original team had exceeded her expectations under combat conditions. The principles she had discovered through desperate necessity were now being refined and improved by soldiers who had the luxury of learning them in controlled environments. But the exercise also reminded her that the most important lesson wasn't about specific techniques or tactical innovations. It was about developing the kind of mental flexibility that allowed soldiers to create new solutions when conventional approaches failed. That psychological adaptability couldn't be taught through lectures or manuals. It had to be developed through experience and reinforced through training that prepared soldiers for uncertainty. During her final address to the International Symposium, Maria shared the insight that had guided her work since returning from Afghanistan. The enemy will always study our procedures and develop countermeasures for our standard responses, she explained to an audience of military leaders from around the world. Our advantage isn't in perfecting those standard responses, it's in developing soldiers who can create new responses faster than the enemy can study them. The applause that followed her remarks reflected more than just appreciation for her technical innovations. It represented recognition that she had articulated a fundamental principle of modern warfare that extended far beyond explosive ordnance disposal operations. As the symposium concluded and international delegates prepared to return to their home countries, Maria reflected on the unexpected path her career had taken. The injury that was supposed to disqualify her from continued service had actually launched the most important phase of her military career, proving that apparent limitations often contain the seeds of unprecedented capabilities. Standing. The office that overlooked the training facilities where soldiers from around the world came to learn adaptive techniques. Maria could see her legacy extending far beyond her individual achievements. The principles she had discovered through necessity were now being refined and expanded by researchers, implemented by military organizations worldwide, and taught to new generations of soldiers who would face challenges she couldn't imagine. Her wounded right hand continued to serve as a reminder of the costs of tactical innovation, but her strengthened left hand represented the possibilities that emerged when soldiers refused to accept limitations that others tried to impose. The grenade she had thrown with her non-dominant hand that morning in Afghanistan had saved 12 lives directly, but the techniques that grew out of that desperate innovation were now protecting soldiers around the world. The Santos innovation had become more than just a tactical technique. It had evolved into a philosophy of military service that emphasized adaptability, innovation, and the kind of creative problem-solving that emerged when conventional approaches failed. Future soldiers would face threats that current training programs couldn't anticipate, but they would face those threats with the confidence that came from understanding that limitations were just starting points for discovering new capabilities. As she prepared for retirement and transitioned to a civilian role as a consultant on adaptive performance, Maria Santos understood that her greatest contribution to American military capabilities wasn't any specific tactical innovation. It was proving that the most effective weapon any military could possess was soldiers who refused to accept that failure was an acceptable option. Her story had become legend within military circles. But the real lesson wasn't about heroism or individual achievement. It was about the willingness to exceed every reasonable expectation of human performance when the mission and teammates' lives depended on innovative thinking and flawless execution. Mourning that had nearly ended her life in an Afghan valley had actually launched a career that influenced military doctrine worldwide, trained thousands of soldiers in adaptive techniques, and created a legacy that would continue protecting warriors for generations to come. Her wounded hand had indeed disqualified her from standard EOD operations, but it had qualified her for something far more important: the role of teaching others that apparent limitations were often just opportunities to discover capabilities they never knew they possessed. Standing in the center that bore her name, surrounded by soldiers from around the world who were learning to think beyond conventional limitations, Maria Santos felt the satisfaction that came from knowing her experience continued to serve a meaningful purpose. The grenade thrown with her left hand had been just the beginning of a journey that proved the most dangerous enemy any force could face was a soldier who had learned that impossible was just another word for challenging. An absolutely incredible journey we've shared together. A full 55,000 words of adventure, character growth, and storytelling. Creating a story of this magnitude requires months of planning, writing, and careful narration to ensure every detail is perfect and every moment keeps you engaged. This has been the equivalent of a complete novella, crafted specifically for this format. If this epic story moved you, inspired you, or simply entertained you through this incredible journey, please show your appreciation by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more amazing long-form stories. Your support means everything to creators like us, who pour our hearts into bringing you the most engaging content possible. Share this with anyone who loves compelling narratives about courage, innovation, and the triumph of the human spirit. Hit that notification bell to be the first to hear our newest epic stories, and consider leaving a comment about which part of Maria Santos's journey resonated most with you. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community and for joining me on this remarkable adventure through 55,000 words of military drama, personal triumph, and tactical innovation. Your engagement and support make it possible for us to continue creating these detailed, immersive narratives that celebrate the extraordinary achievements of ordinary people facing impossible odds. Until our next incredible tale, remember that sometimes our greatest limitations become the foundation for our most extraordinary achievements. I'll see you in the next epic story.